Welcome, dear friend. Take a deep breath, relax your body, and let this peaceful story gently guide you into deep sleep. Henry did not move for a few moments. The world around him felt unusually still, even for a frozen winter morning. No birds in the distance, no wind moving through the trees. Even the usual creaking sound of ice under pressure seemed to fade away. It was as if the lake itself had stopped breathing. Henry slowly took a step back, then another. His boots pressed softly into the snow, leaving deep marks behind him. But his eyes never left the frozen surface of the lake. The shape beneath the ice was still there, unmoving, unchanging, too real to ignore, and too quiet to understand. He had lived in Millhaven his entire life. He had seen storms that broke trees, winters that lasted longer than expected, and ice so thick it could hold heavy trucks without breaking. But he had never seen anything like this. For a moment, he considered turning away and pretending he saw nothing. Many people in small towns did that. They saw strange things and let them disappear in their minds. But Henry knew this was different. This was not something the mind could forget. He finally turned and began walking quickly toward the town. Not running, just faster than before. The snow crunched louder now under his boots, as if even the ground was reacting to what he had seen. Behind him, Lake Wren remained silent. Perfectly silent, like it was waiting. By the time Henry reached Millhaven, the town was just beginning to wake. Smoke rose slowly from chimneys. A few shop doors creaked open, and soft lights flickered inside wooden houses. Life in Millhaven moved gently, especially in winter. People were used to cold mornings and long nights, but when Henry reached the small town center, something in his face made others stop what they were doing. He did not speak at first. He simply stood there, breathing heavily in the cold air. Finally, he said the words no one expected to hear that morning. "There's something under the ice, on Lake Wren." The words did not sound loud, but they changed everything. A few people gathered closer. An old shopkeeper lowered his newspaper. A woman paused mid-step. Even the morning seemed to grow quieter. Henry repeated it more slowly. "I saw a body under the frozen lake." For a moment, nobody responded. Not because they didn't believe him, but because in a place like Millhaven, people knew that some truths meant the day would never feel the same again. And somewhere beyond the town, beneath the thick ice of Lake Wren, a silent mystery waited to be uncovered. Henry did not move for a few moments. The world around him felt unusually still, even for a frozen winter morning. No birds in the distance, no wind moving through the trees. Even the usual creaking sound of ice under pressure seemed to fade away. It was as if the lake itself had stopped breathing. Henry slowly took a step back, then another. His boots pressed softly into the snow, leaving deep marks behind him. But his eyes never left the frozen surface of the lake. The shape beneath the ice was still there. The news spread through Millhaven slowly. Not like fire, not like panic, but like a quiet wind moving through closed windows. At first, people did not fully believe it. A body under the frozen lake. It sounded like something from a story, not real life. But Millhaven was a town where rumors rarely stayed rumors for long. By mid-morning, small groups of people had already gathered near the town store. They spoke in low voices, careful voices. Winter made everyone speak softer anyway. Inside the general store, Mrs. Leland placed cups of coffee on the counter without saying much. No one was laughing today. No one was in a hurry either. Outside, Henry stood near the doorway, still trying to calm his breathing. He kept seeing the same image in his mind, the dark shape beneath the ice, perfectly still, unnaturally still. It was not something you forget easily. A few minutes later, the town sheriff arrived. Sheriff Daniel Harper was a man in his late 40s. Calm voice, slow movements, the kind of person who did not react quickly, but always thought carefully first. He parked his truck near the road and stepped out into the cold air. Snow cracked under his boots as he walked toward Henry. He did not ask many questions at first. He simply listened. Henry explained everything again, this time more slowly, more clearly. "The lake, it's not just ice and water anymore," Henry said. "There's a body under there. I saw it clearly." The sheriff looked toward Lake Wren in the distance. It was hard to believe something so serious could exist in such a quiet, peaceful landscape. White snow, still trees, a frozen lake that looked almost beautiful from far away. But beauty and truth were not always the same thing. After a long pause, the sheriff finally spoke. "We'll check it," he said simply. No panic, no emotion, just procedure. By afternoon, a small team was formed. A few town workers, one medical examiner from a nearby county, and Sheriff Harper himself. They walked toward the lake together in silence. The wind had grown slightly stronger now, moving across the open ice in soft waves. When they reached the edge of Lake Wren, everyone stopped for a moment. Even those who had not believed Henry earlier now felt something different. The ice looked too calm, too smooth, too quiet, like it was hiding something beneath its surface on purpose. The team began preparing equipment to break through the ice. Slow, careful work. Every sound echoed in the cold air. Metal tapping ice, ropes being adjusted, footsteps crunching snow, and beneath all of it, silence, a deep, heavy silence. Sheriff Harper stood a little distance away, watching. He had seen many things in his life, accidents, storm damage, lost people. But something about this felt different. Not frightening exactly, just unusual. As if the lake had been waiting for this moment for a long time. And now, finally, it was ready to reveal its secret. The morning air over Lake Wren had grown sharper as the day continued. What was once quiet and still now carried a strange tension, like the lake itself was holding its breath. The team stood at the edge of the frozen surface, preparing to break through the thick ice. A heavy drill was brought forward. Ropes were checked again and again. No one spoke more than necessary. Even the smallest sound seemed too loud in that place. Sheriff Harper watched carefully as the first mark was made on the ice. The drill pressed down slowly. Metal touched frozen water. A deep grinding sound echoed across the lake. It was not loud, but it carried far in the cold air. Crack. A thin line formed on the surface, then another. The ice did not break easily. It resisted, as if it had been holding something inside for too long and did not want to let go. Henry stood a little behind the group. He kept his eyes fixed on the same spot he had seen earlier, the shape under the ice. He wondered if it was still there, or if his mind had somehow imagined it in the cold morning light. But deep down, he knew what he saw was real. After nearly an hour of careful work, a small section of ice finally gave way. A dark opening appeared, cold water beneath, still and black. A rope was lowered slowly into the hole, attached to a hooked camera device. Everyone leaned slightly forward, waiting, watching. Even breathing felt slower now. The camera entered the water. The screen showed only darkness at first, Then faint shapes began to appear, shadows moving slowly under the ice layer, not alive, not moving, just resting. The technician adjusted the angle, and then for a brief moment, something came into view. A form, human-shaped, wearing a dark coat, frozen in place beneath the ice. A quiet wave of silence passed through the group. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Sheriff Harper did not react immediately. He simply stared at the screen, as if confirming what he already feared was true. After a long pause, he finally said one word. "Stop." The equipment was pulled back slowly. The hole in the ice remained open, like a dark eye looking up at the sky. The wind moved across the surface again, but softer now. Almost respectful. Almost like the lake itself understood what had been discovered. Sheriff Harper stepped closer to Henry. "You were right," he said quietly. Henry did not answer. He only nodded slightly, because some truths did not need more words. By late afternoon, word had already begun spreading through Millhaven. Not loudly, not officially, but in small conversations, at doorsteps, inside kitchens, between neighbors who pretended not to be worried. A body had been found beneath Lake Wren, and no one yet knew who it was, or how long it had been there, or why the frozen lake had kept it hidden for so long. As the sun began to lower, the sky turned pale orange above the endless snow. The lake remained still, but now it no longer felt peaceful. It felt watched, as if the story of Millhaven had just entered a chapter no one was prepared for. And somewhere beneath the ice, the silence continued to hold its secret. Evening arrived slowly over Millhaven. The kind of evening that does not feel like a clear ending to the day, but rather a gradual fading of light. Snow continued to rest on rooftops, trees, and empty roads. Inside homes, warm yellow lights began to glow softly, one by one. But behind that warmth, something heavier had settled over the town. Silence felt different now, not peaceful, more like uncertainty. At the small-town office, Sheriff Harper sat with a stack of old records spread across a wooden table. A single lamp lit the room. Outside the window, the world was already turning darker. The body recovered from Lake Wren had been brought to a temporary facility for examination. But there were no answers yet. No identity, no explanation. Only questions. Henry sat nearby, quietly watching the sheriff go through the files. Old missing person reports, yellowed pages, names from years ago. Some cases were forgotten long before this winter. The sheriff rubbed his forehead slowly. "We need to check every record from the past 20 years, he said. Henry nodded, but he said nothing. The truth was simple. If someone had been under that ice for a long time, then Millhaven had already forgotten them, and forgotten things are often the hardest to bring back. The medical examiner had confirmed only one detail so far. The body had been in the ice for a long time. Not days, not weeks, years. The exact number was still unclear, but the conclusion was enough to quiet the entire room. Years. That single word changed everything. It meant this was not a recent accident, not a simple tragedy. It was something from the past, something buried. Sheriff Harper leaned back in his chair. For a long moment he just looked at the ceiling, thinking, remembering, searching through years of small-town memory that never made it into official reports. Then he spoke quietly. "There was a case," he said. Henry looked up. "About 15 years ago, a man went missing near Lake Wren." The sheriff stood up and walked toward a cabinet. He pulled out an old folder. Dust rose slightly as it opened. Inside was a faded photograph, a man standing near the lake, smiling, alive. Sheriff Harper placed the photo on the table. "This is Daniel Reed," he said. Henry studied the image. The face was unfamiliar to him now, but something about it felt important. "Local fisherman," the sheriff continued. "Lived alone, quiet man, no known conflicts." He paused, and then, one winter, he disappeared. The room grew even quieter. Even the ticking clock seemed softer. Henry looked at the photo again, and then, slowly, something cold settled in his thoughts. 15 years, frozen lake, hidden beneath ice, a life paused in time. Sheriff Harper closed the folder gently. "We need to confirm it," he said. "But I think we've found him." Outside, the wind moved across the town again. Soft, slow, like it had carried this secret for a very long time. And finally, it was beginning to let it go. Night had fully settled over Millhaven. The sky was dark now, covered in a quiet layer of stars that barely pierced the cold winter air. Inside the small-town office, the atmosphere felt heavier than the night outside. Sheriff Harper sat still for a long time, staring at the old photograph of Daniel Reed. Henry remained in the corner, silent, as if afraid that speaking would break something fragile in the room. The medical examiner had sent another message earlier, a clearer confirmation. The remains matched the missing fisherman from years ago, Daniel Reed. 15 winters had passed since he disappeared near Lake Wren. 15 years of silence beneath the ice. The sheriff exhaled slowly. "It doesn't make sense," he said quietly. Henry finally spoke. "What doesn't?" Harper tapped the table gently with his fingers. If someone went missing that close to town, someone should have seen something, heard something, reported something unusual. He paused, but there was nothing, no signs, no witnesses, no follow-up. The room grew quiet again. Outside, a faint wind brushed against the window, as if trying to listen. Henry leaned forward slightly. "Maybe people did see something," he said. "Maybe they just didn't understand it at the time." Sheriff Harper didn't answer immediately, because sometimes that was the most troubling possibility. Not that something was hidden, but that it had been seen and ignored. The sheriff opened another folder. Old reports, weather records, lake conditions from that winter. Most of it looked ordinary. Heavy snowfall, low temperatures, strong ice formation that year. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. And that was what bothered him the most. Normal winters did not usually end with someone disappearing into history beneath a frozen lake. Harper stood and walked toward the window. Outside Millhaven was almost completely dark now. A few house lights glowed softly in the distance. The lake could not be seen from here, but it was there, quiet, waiting. Henry broke the silence again. "What if it wasn't an accident?" he asked. The sheriff did not turn around. He kept looking outside. "That's the question," he said slowly. "And right now, we don't have an answer." A long silence followed, the kind that does not feel empty, but full of thoughts no one says out loud. After a moment, Harper closed the folders. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go back to the lake. We look deeper. Not just the ice, not just the body, everything around it." Henry nodded. But neither of them felt relieved, because both understood something quietly forming in their minds. This was not just about a man who disappeared. It was about why the lake had kept him hidden for so long, and what else it might still be hiding. Outside, The wind moved again across Millhaven, slow, cold, patient, as if it had waited many years for this story to begin again. Morning returned to Millhaven without any celebration. The sun rose slowly, pale and weak through the winter haze. Snow still covered every roof, every road, every silent corner of the town. But something had changed beneath the surface of that quiet morning. People walked a little slower, spoke a little softer, and looked toward Lake Wren more often than usual. Sheriff Harper arrived at the lake early, before most of the town had fully woken. The air was colder than the day before. The ice looked unchanged, as if nothing had happened there at all. But everyone knew better now. Henry was already there, standing near the edge, hands tucked inside his coat. He had not slept well, not because of fear, but because of thought. Some questions do not allow the mind to rest easily. The investigation team returned with more equipment, stronger tools, better lights, and a more careful plan. Today was not about discovery anymore. It was about understanding. The ice-breaking began again, slowly, carefully. The sound of drilling echoed across the frozen lake once more. Crack, grind, crack. Each sound felt heavier than the day before, as if the lake was more aware now, more unwilling to reveal what it had kept for so long. Sheriff Harper watched every movement closely, not rushing anything, not forcing anything, just allowing the work to continue at its own pace. After a long time, a wider opening was created in the ice. Cold air rose from the dark water beneath. One of the divers prepared to go down. The team checked his gear twice, then a third time. No one wanted mistakes here. Slowly, the diver entered the water. The surface closed slightly around him, then disappeared beneath the ice layer. Only the rope and camera feed remained above. The screen showed darkness at first, then faint movement, then the shape of the lake floor, and there it was. The body, still in the same position as before, unmoving, preserved by cold and time. But something new appeared today. Near the body, half buried in sediment, a small object. The technician zoomed in carefully. The image sharpened slowly. It was a watch, an old wristwatch. Sheriff Harper leaned forward. "Bring it up," he said immediately. Minutes later, the diver resurfaced with the object secured. It was placed carefully on a clean surface near the lake edge. Everyone gathered around. Even Henry stepped closer. The watch was old, but not destroyed. The glass was cracked slightly. The metal band was worn, but still intact. Sheriff Harper turned it slowly in his hands. On the back, faint engraving was visible. A name, Daniel Reed. Henry exhaled quietly. So it was confirmed again, not just by records, but by something physical, something real, something that had survived 15 years under ice. The wind moved across the lake as if responding, soft, almost respectful. Sheriff Harper looked at Henry. "We're not just looking at a body anymore," he said quietly. "We're looking at the last moment someone left behind." Henry didn't respond, because that idea felt heavier than words. Somewhere beneath the frozen lake, the past was no longer fully hidden, and Millhaven was beginning to realize that the ice had not only preserved a body, it had preserved a story. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Lake Wren looked almost peaceful again, as if nothing unusual had ever happened there. The ice still stretched wide and white, reflecting the pale winter sky. But for the people standing beside it, nothing felt peaceful anymore. Sheriff Harper held the recovered watch for a moment longer before placing it into an evidence bag. Carefully, almost respectfully. Henry stood a little apart from the group, watching the lake instead of the people. His thoughts were no longer focused on what had been found, but on what had been forgotten. 15 years was not just time. It was distance. Distance from memory. Distance from truth. Distance from the moment everything changed. Later that afternoon, the sheriff returned to town with the watch and the official confirmation. Daniel Reed. The name now had weight again, not just a file in an old cabinet, but a person who had once walked these streets. The news spread more slowly this time. People did not rush to talk about it. Instead, they paused when they heard it, nodded quietly, and then looked away, as if trying to place a memory they were not sure they truly had. Inside the small diner near Main Street, a few older residents gathered without speaking at first. Only the sound of coffee cups touching saucers filled the air. Then slowly one of them spoke. "I remember him," an old woman said. Her voice was uncertain, like she was reaching into something far away. "He used to come in during winter mornings, always sat near the window." Another man frowned slightly. "I think I saw him near the lake once, a long time ago." The memories were not sharp. They were soft, broken at the edges, like photographs left too long in sunlight. But they were there, somewhere. Sheriff Harper listened quietly from the corner of the diner. He did not interrupt. He knew something important was happening, not in the investigation files, but in the minds of the town itself. Memory was beginning to return, slowly, unevenly, like ice melting in reverse. One of the residents leaned forward. "There was a storm that winter," he said. "A bad one. People stayed inside for days." Another nodded. "Yes, I remember the wind. It was loud, strange loud." But when asked what happened near Lake Wren during that time, no one could answer clearly. The details slipped away each time someone tried to hold them. Sheriff Harper closed his notebook. Something about this did not sit right. Not the discovery, not the body, but the gaps, the missing pieces where memory should have been. That evening, Henry returned to the lake alone. The sky was turning soft orange again, fading slowly into blue. He stood at the edge of the ice, hands deep in his pockets. The wind was calm. The world felt far away. He looked down at the frozen surface, and for a brief moment he imagined the lake as it once was, not frozen, not silent, but moving, living. Then he whispered to himself, "What really happened here?" No answer came. Only the sound of wind passing gently over the ice. And beneath that ice, the lake remained silent, as if waiting for the next piece of the story to be remembered. The next morning arrived with a quiet snowfall. Tiny flakes drifted gently from the gray sky, settling softly across the streets of Millhaven. Fresh snow covered yesterday's footprints, leaving the town looking untouched once again. It was one of those peaceful winter mornings when everything appeared new. Sheriff Harper unlocked the small records office just after sunrise. The room was warm, carrying the familiar scent of old paper, polished wood, and fresh coffee. He placed Daniel Reed's worn photograph on his desk. Beside it lay the recovered wristwatch. Both had remained silent for 15 years. Now they were beginning to tell a story. Harper opened an old calendar from the year Daniel disappeared. He carefully traced each date with his finger. December, heavy snowfall, several freezing nights. Then he found the final entry, December 18th. That was the last ordinary day anyone remembered seeing Daniel Reed. According to the notes, Daniel had visited the general store shortly before noon. Mrs. Leland had sold him coffee beans, lamp oil, fresh bread, and a small bag of flour. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested trouble. After leaving the store, he had smiled, wished everyone a pleasant afternoon, and walked toward the road leading to Lake Wren. No one remembered seeing him after that. Harper quietly closed the notebook. Sometimes the smallest details carried the greatest meaning. If Daniel had planned to disappear, why buy fresh bread? Why purchase supplies for the coming week? People preparing to leave forever rarely planned tomorrow's breakfast. Outside, the church bell rang softly across the snowy town. Its slow chime drifted through the cold air. Peaceful, steady, comforting. Henry arrived a few minutes later, gently brushing snow from his coat before stepping inside. The sheriff looked up. "I think Daniel expected to come home that evening," Harper said. Henry nodded slowly. Then something changed. Neither man spoke for a while. The silence between them felt thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. Harper unfolded an old weather report. "The storm everyone remembers didn't begin until late that night," he explained. Henry looked surprised. So the weather was clear. "For most of the afternoon," Harper replied. They both looked toward the window. Outside, snow continued falling softly. The new information raised another quiet question. If the lake had been calm, if the roads had been open, if the weather had been peaceful, then what had happened between Daniel leaving the store and disappearing forever? There was no sign of struggle, no damaged equipment, no broken ice reported that day, only an ordinary afternoon that somehow became an extraordinary mystery. Later that day, Sheriff Harper and Henry walked back toward Lake Wren. Fresh snow covered the investigation site, making it appear untouched once again. The lake stretched endlessly before them, beautiful, silent, patient. Henry stood near the shoreline and looked across the frozen surface. "It's strange," he whispered. "What is?" "The lake doesn't feel frightening." Harper looked across the endless white ice. "No," he agreed. "It feels like it's protecting something." The wind moved gently across the frozen water, carrying fine snow crystals into the sunlight. For a brief moment they sparkled like thousands of tiny stars. Neither man realized that the next clue would not come from the lake itself. It would come from someone who had remained silent for 15 long winters. Someone who had finally decided it was time to remember. The snow continued to fall through the night. By morning, Millhaven looked softer than ever. White rooftops, white fences, white fields stretching quietly toward the distant forest. The town seemed wrapped in a peaceful blanket of silence. Sheriff Harper had just poured himself a cup of coffee when someone knocked gently on the office door. 3 slow knocks, not hurried, not uncertain, just patient. He opened the door. Standing outside was an elderly woman wearing a long gray coat and a knitted blue scarf. Her silver hair rested neatly beneath a wool hat. She smiled politely. "Good morning, Sheriff." "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor." Eleanor Brooks was one of the oldest residents in Millhaven. She had lived there for nearly 70 years. If anyone remembered the past, it was probably her. "May I come in?" she asked softly. Of course. She stepped inside, carefully removing her gloves before sitting near the window. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The room was filled only with the gentle ticking of the old clock. Finally, Eleanor looked at the photograph of Daniel Reed resting on the sheriff's desk. "I knew him," she said quietly. Harper looked up. "You did?" She nodded. "He wasn't just the fisherman everyone remembers." She smiled gently at the memory. "He loved books." The sheriff seemed surprised. "Books?" "Oh, yes. Every Friday afternoon he visited the little library. He always borrowed travel journals, stories about mountains, forests, and quiet lakes across America." Harper listened carefully. This was a side of Daniel that no official report had ever mentioned. "He once told me," Eleanor continued, "that every lake keeps its own memories." She looked out the frosted window. "I thought he was simply being poetic." The sheriff wrote the sentence in his notebook. "Every lake keeps its own memories." It sounded simple, yet somehow meaningful. Eleanor folded her hands. "There is something else." Harper waited. "The afternoon before he disappeared, I saw him." "Where?" "Near the old wooden dock." She closed her eyes for a moment, searching through memories that had slept for many winters. He wasn't alone. The sheriff remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. There was another person standing beside him. "A man?" I'm not sure." The snowfall had just begun. The figure wore a long, dark coat. I couldn't see the face. Harper leaned forward slightly. "Did they seem to be arguing?" Eleanor shook her head. "No. They were simply standing together, looking across the lake, as if waiting for something." The room became very quiet. This was the first new witness account in 15 years. Not dramatic, not frightening, just one quiet memory finally returning. Eleanor sighed softly. "I almost forgot it completely." "Perhaps I wanted to." "The years have a way of covering memories like snow covers old footsteps." Harper nodded. He understood. Some memories do not disappear. They simply wait. Outside, the snowfall finally began to slow. A pale beam of sunlight slipped through the clouds, shining gently across the frozen surface of Lake Wren. Far away, the lake looked calm, beautiful, silent, as if it had listened carefully to Eleanor's story, and was quietly waiting for someone to remember the rest. The morning sun climbed slowly above the pine trees, casting a soft golden light across the fresh snow. Lake Wren shimmered beneath the winter sky. Its frozen surface looked smooth and endless, as though it had never been disturbed. Sheriff Harper and Henry drove quietly toward the eastern shore of the lake. Neither of them spoke during the journey. The only sound inside the truck was the gentle hum of the engine and the soft whisper of warm air flowing from the heater. Eleanor's memory stayed with them. A figure in a dark coat, standing beside Daniel Reed, looking across the lake. It was not much, but after 15 years of silence, even the smallest memory mattered. The truck came to a stop near an old path that disappeared into the snow-covered forest. Harper stepped outside first. The cold air touched his face immediately. It was crisp, clean, almost refreshing. Henry followed a moment later. Together they walked slowly through the quiet woods. Tall pine trees surrounded the narrow trail, their branches heavy with snow. Now and then small flakes drifted gently to the ground. The forest was peaceful. Every step seemed softer than the last. After several minutes, the trees began to thin. Ahead of them stood an old wooden dock. Time had changed it. Several boards had faded to a weathered gray. The handrails leaned slightly. A few posts tilted toward the frozen lake. Yet the dock remained standing, patiently facing the quiet water just as it had for decades. Henry stopped walking. "So this is where she saw him." Harper nodded. "It hasn't changed much." The sheriff stepped carefully onto the dock. Each board gave a gentle creak beneath his boots. Not loud, just enough to remind them of its age. He reached the end and looked across the frozen lake. The view was beautiful. Snow-covered hills rested peacefully in the distance. The pine forest stretched along the shoreline like a dark green blanket. Above them, a pair of ravens glided silently through the pale blue sky. Nothing about the place suggested tragedy. It felt calm, almost comforting. Harper closed his eyes for a moment. He tried to imagine the afternoon 15 years earlier, Daniel standing here, the mysterious figure beside him, the lake not yet fully frozen. A quiet conversation carried away by the wind. Then, nothing. No witness remembered seeing them leave. No one heard a cry for help. No broken ice had been reported. The story simply ended. Henry noticed something near one of the old support posts. Half hidden beneath fresh snow lay a small piece of weathered wood. It looked ordinary at first, but when he brushed the snow away, faint carved letters appeared. Very old, almost erased by time. Harper knelt beside him. The carving was difficult to read. Only a few letters remained clear. "Dear..." The sheriff looked thoughtfully at Henry. "Daniel Reed." Henry nodded slowly. It could be. Perhaps Daniel had carved his initials here many years ago. Perhaps someone else had. There was no way to know. Still, the quiet discovery made the dock feel strangely personal. This had not been just another place along the lake. It had meant something to Daniel. The wind drifted gently across the frozen water. Neither man spoke. Sometimes silence was the best way to listen. And somewhere beyond the endless sheet of ice, Lake Wren continued to guard its memories, waiting patiently for the next forgotten piece of the story to return. The afternoon faded gently into evening as Sheriff Harper and Henry left the old wooden dock behind. The forest remained quiet. Snowflakes drifted slowly between the tall pine trees, settling softly on branches that had stood there for generations. Neither man felt disappointed that they had found only a few carved initials. Sometimes the smallest discoveries opened the largest doors. Back in Millhaven, warm lights glowed from the windows of the old houses. The town looked peaceful again. Children built small snowmen in their front yards. Smoke curled lazily from brick chimneys. From a distance, nothing suggested that a 15-year-old mystery had returned. As they drove through the quiet streets, Henry looked out the window. "You know," he said softly, "Daniel must have had a home." Sheriff Harper nodded. "He did. It's been empty ever since he disappeared." Henry turned toward him. "No one ever went inside?" "Not after his sister moved away," Harper replied. "The house was locked. People respected his privacy." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Harper smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time we visit." Just before sunset, they arrived at the small farmhouse where Daniel Reed had once lived. It stood alone at the edge of town. A narrow path led to the front porch, almost hidden beneath fresh snow. The little house looked peaceful. Its windows reflected the fading orange light of the evening sky. The sheriff unlocked the front door with an old key kept in the town records office. The door opened with a long, gentle creak. Inside, everything was still. Dust rested quietly on the furniture. A rocking chair sat beside a stone fireplace. Books filled a wooden shelf near the window. A thick wool blanket remained folded neatly over a small sofa. It felt less like an abandoned house, and more like someone had simply stepped outside for a short walk. Henry removed his hat. "It feels like he's still here." Harper nodded. "In a way, maybe he is." They searched slowly, careful not to disturb more than necessary. The kitchen remained tidy, the bedroom untouched. Nothing suggested fear or struggle. Everything spoke of an ordinary life. As darkness settled outside, Harper noticed a narrow ladder leading to the attic. A small wooden hatch opened with surprising ease. Warm flashlight beams swept across the dusty space. Old boxes, fishing equipment, winter coats, family photographs, and in one corner, a small cedar chest. Henry carefully lifted the lid. Inside were neatly tied bundles of letters. Most were from Daniel's sister. Some were holiday cards. Others contained recipes, family news, and birthday wishes. But beneath them all lay a single envelope. It had no stamp, no address, only 2 handwritten words. "For tomorrow." The paper had yellowed with age. Its edges were slightly curled. Sheriff Harper picked it up gently, almost afraid the paper might crumble. He looked at Henry. "I don't think this letter was ever mailed." Henry quietly nodded. The room felt unusually still. Outside, the winter wind whispered softly around the roof. Inside the attic, the unopened letter rested in Harper's hands. A message written 15 years ago, waiting patiently for someone to read it. He took a slow breath, then very carefully, he opened the envelope. The attic remained perfectly still. Only the soft beam of the sheriff's flashlight moved gently across the old wooden floor. Sheriff Harper carefully unfolded the yellowed letter. The paper felt fragile after so many years. The handwriting was neat and steady. It was unmistakably Daniel Reed's. For a long moment, Harper simply looked at the first line. Then he began reading aloud in a calm voice. "If tomorrow goes as planned, I'll finally have the answer I've been searching for." Henry listened quietly. The words were simple, yet they carried a quiet weight. Harper continued. "The lake has always felt different to me. Most people see only water and ice. I feel that it remembers every season, every visitor, every quiet promise." Henry smiled faintly. "That sounds like what Mrs. Eleanor told us." Harper nodded. "It does." The letter continued. "Someone has agreed to meet me at the old dock tomorrow afternoon. We've spoken only a few times, but I believe they know something important about my father's final winter." The sheriff paused. Daniel's father had died many years before. According to the town records, it had been considered a natural death. Nothing unusual had ever been reported. Harper read the next lines even more carefully. "I don't know exactly what I'll learn, perhaps nothing at all, but if there is a truth waiting beneath years of silence, I feel it's finally time to hear it." The attic fell silent once again. Snow tapped gently against the small attic window. The peaceful sound seemed almost comforting. Henry looked toward the old cedar chest. "So Daniel wasn't meeting someone by chance?" "No," Harper replied softly. "He planned the meeting." The sheriff folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. "It changes the timeline," he said. "It tells us Daniel expected to come home." Henry looked thoughtful. "He even wrote, 'for tomorrow.'" "Exactly. If he believed he was in danger, he probably wouldn't have written with such hope." The two men continued searching through the cedar chest. Most of its contents were ordinary. old family photographs, fishing licenses, maps of nearby lakes, a worn leather notebook. Nothing immediately explained what had happened after Daniel left for the dock. As Harper gently closed the chest, something slipped quietly onto the floor, a folded map. It landed almost silently. Henry picked it up and carefully opened it across an old wooden table. It was a detailed map of Lake Wren. At first, everything appeared normal: shoreline, forest paths, fishing spots. But near the center of the lake, someone had drawn a small circle in faded blue pencil. Next to it were 3 carefully written words: deep but peaceful. Neither man spoke. The room seemed to grow even quieter. Outside, the wind eased until almost nothing could be heard. Sheriff Harper studied the map for several moments. Then he smiled gently. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "we'll return to this exact spot." Henry nodded, not with excitement, but with quiet determination. Some mysteries were solved through urgency. Others revealed themselves only to those willing to move slowly and patiently. Far beyond the attic window, the frozen surface of Lake Wren rested beneath the moonlight. Silent, beautiful. As though it already knew they were one step closer to understanding its long-kept secret. Morning arrived with a quiet silver light that spread gently across Millhaven. The snowfall had stopped during the night, leaving the air clear and still. Every rooftop sparkled beneath the rising sun, and the frozen surface of Lake Wren reflected the sky like a sheet of polished glass. Sheriff Harper carefully folded the old map and slipped it inside his coat. Henry stood beside the truck, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. Neither of them spoke much. There was no need. The peaceful silence of the morning seemed to carry enough thoughts for both of them. Soon they drove toward the northern shore of the lake. The road curved through snow-covered pine trees, their branches bending gently beneath the weight of fresh snow. Everything looked calm, the kind of calm that made the world feel slower. When they reached the shoreline, the investigation team was already waiting. The sheriff unfolded the old map across the hood of the truck. He pointed to the faded blue circle. "This is where we're going." One of the deputies studied the map. "It's almost the exact center of the lake." Harper nodded. "That's where Daniel marked it." The group began walking carefully across the frozen surface. Each step echoed softly beneath their boots. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound blended with the gentle winter breeze. No one hurried. The lake stretched endlessly around them, white and silent beneath the bright morning sky. After nearly 20 minutes, Harper stopped. He looked at the map, then at the landscape, then back again. "We're here." At first, nothing seemed unusual, only smooth snow covering the ice. No cracks, no marks, no signs that anyone had stood there before. Henry slowly brushed away the fresh layer of snow with his boot. Beneath it, something caught the sunlight. A thin metal stake, almost completely buried in the ice. Only a few inches remained visible above the surface. Sheriff Harper knelt beside it. The stake looked old, very old. Its metal was dark with age, but it remained firmly fixed in place. Tied around it was a faded strip of blue cloth. The fabric moved gently in the wind, almost like a quiet signal waiting to be noticed again. Henry frowned. Who would place something like this out here? Harper ran his gloved hand lightly across the metal. "I don't know. But someone wanted this exact spot to be remembered." The team carefully measured the location. Everything matched the mark on Daniel's map. There was no doubt. This was the place he had wanted someone to find. One of the deputies quietly asked, "Should we drill here?" Harper looked across the endless frozen lake before answering, "Yes." But slowly, very slowly. The equipment was brought forward once more. The first drill touched the ice. Its low humming sound drifted across the empty lake. As the work began, Henry looked toward the distant shoreline. Millhaven appeared small from here. Tiny houses, thin trails of chimney smoke. A peaceful town, surrounded by endless winter. It was hard to believe that beneath this beautiful silence lay a mystery that had waited 15 long years. The drill continued its slow work. The ice groaned softly beneath the pressure. Then, a faint hollow sound echoed from below, different from before. The workers paused. Sheriff Harper raised his hand. "Stop." Everyone stood perfectly still. For a few seconds, only silence remained. Then from somewhere deep beneath the frozen lake came another gentle sound. Not loud, not frightening, just a soft echo, as if something hidden below had quietly answered their search. The frozen lake remained perfectly still. No one moved. The soft echo they had heard faded gently into silence, leaving only the whisper of the winter wind. Sheriff Harper stood quietly, listening. Perhaps it had been nothing more than the shifting of ancient ice. Frozen lakes often made unexpected sounds. They expanded, they settled, they breathed in their own quiet way. Still, something about this sound felt different, not alarming, simply unusual. Harper lowered his hand. "Let's continue," he said softly. The workers nodded. The drill touched the ice once again. Its steady hum blended with the peaceful morning around them. The hole widened little by little. Every movement was careful, every action deliberate. No one wished to disturb the lake more than necessary. Henry watched the clouds drifting overhead. They moved slowly across the bright blue sky. For a moment he imagined Daniel Reed standing in this very place 15 years earlier. Perhaps he had looked at these same clouds. Perhaps he had listened to the same gentle wind. The thought made the lake feel strangely timeless. As the opening grew larger, one of the workers lowered a waterproof camera beneath the surface. The monitor flickered softly. Dark water filled the screen. Tiny air bubbles drifted upward like silver pearls. The beam of light swept slowly across the lake below. Smooth ice above, clear water beneath. Everything looked calm, peaceful. Then, the camera reached the area beneath the old metal marker. The light revealed something unexpected, not another body, not anything frightening. Instead, large wooden beams rested quietly on the lake bed, weathered by time, covered with a thin layer of pale sand. Sheriff Harper leaned closer to the screen. "Pause there." The technician stopped the camera. The image became steady. Several beams crossed each other in neat lines. They looked almost intentional. Henry tilted his head. "That doesn't look natural." "No," Harper replied. "It doesn't." One of the older workers studied the monitor for a long moment before speaking. "I've seen something similar before." Everyone turned toward him. "It reminds me of the remains of an old fishing platform." Harper looked surprised. "A platform?" The man nodded. "My grandfather once told me that many years ago, before modern docks were built, fishermen sometimes constructed wooden platforms on frozen lakes during winter. Henry looked back at the screen. So this place meant something long before Daniel. It seems that way, Harper answered. The camera continued exploring slowly around the old beams. Small fish glided peacefully through the clear water. Long strands of lake grass swayed gently with the current. Time seemed to move differently beneath the ice, slower, gentler, almost untouched. Then the light caught another object, a small wooden box. It rested quietly between two old beams. Its lid remained closed. The wood had darkened with age, but the shape was still clear. The technician carefully zoomed in. No markings, no lock, just a simple handcrafted box. Henry whispered, "Do you think Daniel knew it was here?" Sheriff Harper smiled thoughtfully. "I don't know. But I think we're beginning to understand why he came to this exact spot." The team prepared another retrieval line. There was no urgency. The lake had protected its secrets for many years. A few more careful minutes would make no difference. Above them, the winter sun climbed a little higher, filling the frozen landscape with soft, golden light. Lake Wren remained calm. Its icy surface reflected the bright sky like a quiet mirror. And somewhere beneath that peaceful beauty, a small forgotten box waited patiently, ready to tell the next part of a story that had slept beneath the ice for 15 long winters. The winter sun continued its slow journey across the sky. Its gentle light rested softly on the frozen surface of Lake Wren, turning the snow into thousands of tiny, sparkling crystals. No one hurried. The lake had waited 15 years. It could wait a few more moments. Sheriff Harper gave a quiet nod. The retrieval line was lowered carefully through the opening in the ice. The hook moved slowly beneath the clear water, guided by the small underwater camera. On the monitor, the little wooden box rested peacefully between the old beams. It looked almost untouched by time. The current beneath the ice was gentle. Nothing disturbed the quiet world below. The diver guided the hook beneath the box with steady hands. For a moment, it slipped slightly across the sandy lake bed. Then it settled securely. Slowly, Harper whispered. The line tightened. Little by little, the box began its journey upward. Everyone watched without speaking. The water remained perfectly calm. Tiny bubbles floated toward the surface, catching the light like small silver stars. A few minutes later, the box emerged through the opening in the ice. Water streamed gently from its sides before freezing into delicate crystals in the cold air. Henry carefully lifted it onto a clean blanket spread across the snow. The box was smaller than everyone had imagined, about the size of a hardcover book. Its wood was dark with age, but it remained surprisingly strong. One corner carried the faint carving of a pine tree. Simple, beautiful. Someone had crafted it with patience many years ago. Sheriff Harper brushed away the thin layer of frost covering the lid. There was no lock, no nails, only a small wooden clasp. He looked at the others. No sudden movements. Everyone nodded. With great care, Harper lifted the clasp. The lid opened slowly. Inside, there was no treasure, no money, no mysterious object, only a few ordinary things resting quietly together. A folded wool scarf, a small leather notebook, a polished river stone, and an old photograph protected inside a clear, waterproof sleeve. For several moments, nobody reached inside. The objects seemed strangely peaceful, like memories placed gently into a safe place. Henry finally picked up the photograph. It showed Lake Wren during summer. The water shimmered beneath bright sunshine. The old wooden dock stood proudly beside the shore, and near the end of the dock stood two smiling people. One of them was clearly Daniel Reed. The other person was difficult to recognize. The face was partly hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. Sheriff Harper studied the picture quietly. This must have been taken years before Daniel disappeared. Henry nodded. They both look happy. The sheriff placed the photograph back into its sleeve. Then he opened the leather notebook. Its pages had yellowed slightly, but the careful waterproof wrapping had protected the writing. The first page held only one sentence, written neatly in blue ink. Some memories deserve to be protected, not forgotten. Harper smiled softly. They're not the words of a frightened man. Henry looked across the frozen lake. No, they're the words of someone who loved this place. The winter breeze moved gently across the ice once again. Far above, a bald eagle circled silently against the bright blue sky. Everything felt peaceful. The mystery remained, but now it carried less darkness and more quiet understanding. Because sometimes the greatest discoveries are not about solving crimes. Sometimes they are about remembering a life that should never have been forgotten. The little wooden box had waited patiently beneath the frozen lake. Now, at last, its story was beginning to be heard. The wind had started to soften again over Lake Wren. It moved gently across the frozen surface, as if it no longer wished to disturb what had been uncovered. Sheriff Harper closed the leather notebook carefully and placed it back inside the wooden box. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt different now, lighter, not because the mystery was solved, but because it was no longer completely unknown. Henry kept holding the photograph for a little longer before gently placing it down. "Two people," he said quietly. "Yes," Harper replied. "But we still don't know who the other person is." One of the deputies leaned closer. "The scarf in the box. It looks handmade." Henry nodded. It could belong to the second person in the photo. Sheriff Harper looked again at the image. Daniel Reed stood on the wooden dock, smiling softly at the camera. The unknown figure beside him stood slightly turned away from the lens, as if they preferred not to be seen clearly, or as if they were protecting something. Harper closed the box carefully. "Let's not rush this," he said. "Everything here is connected. We just haven't seen the full picture yet." By late afternoon, the team began packing their equipment. The opening in the ice was left carefully sealed for safety, marked clearly with wooden stakes and bright tape. Lake Wren returned to its quiet state once more. But now, it no longer felt empty. It felt remembered. Henry stood at the edge of the lake a little longer after the others left. Sheriff Harper joined him. The sky had begun to shift into soft shades of orange and pale gold. Sunset was approaching. Henry finally spoke. "Do you think Daniel was hiding something?" Harper thought for a moment. "No," he said slowly. "I think he was protecting something." Henry turned slightly. "What's the difference?" The sheriff looked out across the frozen lake. "Hiding his fear," he said. "Protecting his love." The words settled quietly between them. The wind moved again, carrying a soft, cold breath across the ice. Somewhere beneath that frozen surface, Daniel Reed's final days were no longer completely lost. They were beginning to take shape, not as a tragedy, but as a story still waiting to be fully understood. That night, Millhaven felt unusually calm. The townspeople did not yet know everything that had been found. Only fragments had reached them. A box, a photograph, a notebook. But even fragments change the way people think. Inside the sheriff's office, Harper placed the recovered items carefully on his desk. He stared at them for a long time. Then he opened the notebook again. His eyes returned to the first sentence. Some memories deserve to be protected, not forgotten. He leaned back slightly in his chair. For the first time since the investigation began, he was no longer just searching for what happened. He was trying to understand why someone would choose silence over explanation. And somewhere in that silence, a deeper truth was still waiting beneath the ice. A truth that had not yet been spoken. Only preserved. Only protected. Only waiting. Night settled quietly over Millhaven again. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the world outside still and clean under a pale moon. Inside the sheriff's office, the light remained on long after most of the town had gone to sleep. Sheriff Harper sat at his desk. The wooden box opened once more in front of him. Henry was still there, leaning back in a chair near the wall. Neither of them looked tired in the usual sense. It was something else, a quiet kind of alertness, the kind that comes when answers are close, but not yet complete. Harper turned the old photograph in his hands again. Daniel Reed stood smiling beside the unknown figure. But tonight, something new caught his attention, a detail he had overlooked before. On the edge of the dock in the background, barely visible, was a second small boat tied loosely to the side. Henry noticed the sheriff's expression. "What is it?" Harper didn't answer immediately. He reached for a magnifying glass and brought it closer to the photograph. The second boat had something written on its side, faded, almost hidden, but still readable. A name. Harper's voice lowered slightly. "There's another name here." Henry leaned forward. "What name?" The sheriff paused for a moment. Then he said it. "Evelyn." The room grew quiet. Henry repeated it softly. "Evelyn." Harper carefully placed the photograph down. It wasn't in any official record. That means she either left town long before Daniel disappeared, or no one ever reported her connection to him. Henry looked confused. But she was with him on the dock. Yes. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, and she might be the person Eleanor saw that day. The missing figure. The unknown presence beside Daniel Reed. Now had a name. Evelyn. Outside, the wind moved gently against the windows. Not strong, just steady, as if it had been carrying this name for a long time, waiting for someone to finally hear it. Harper opened the leather notebook again. This time he flipped deeper inside. Near the middle of the pages he found something new. A small pressed flower, carefully preserved, still holding its shape after many years. On the page beside it, a short note was written. "If I ever stop returning, follow what I could not finish." Henry read the line slowly. "That sounds like a warning." Harper shook his head slightly. Not a warning. A request. The sheriff closed the notebook gently. Daniel didn't expect to disappear. He expected something to remain unfinished. Henry looked towards the window. The moonlight reflected softly off the snow outside. "So, Evelyn is still part of this story," he said. "Yes," Harper replied, "and we still don't know where she is." A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Somewhere in Millhaven, Someone had once been deeply connected to Daniel Reed. Someone named Evelyn. And whatever had happened 15 years ago, it was no longer a single-person story. It had always been shared. The sheriff stood slowly. "Tomorrow," he said, "we find out who she was." Henry nodded. Outside, the frozen world remained calm. But now, beneath that calm surface, the story had shifted again. From one mystery to 2 lives, and a promise that was never completed. Morning arrived quietly, like it always did in Millhaven. No sudden change, no dramatic light, just a slow spreading of pale winter brightness across the frozen world. Sheriff Harper did not waste time. The moment the office opened, he began searching old town records again. This time, he was not only looking for Daniel Reed, he was looking for Evelyn. Henry arrived a little later carrying 2 cups of coffee. One was placed gently on the sheriff's desk. Neither of them spoke at first. The name from last night still lingered in the air. Evelyn, a name that had suddenly connected pieces of a puzzle they did not fully understand yet. Harper opened a thick archive folder labeled Resident Records, past 30 years. Pages were carefully sorted, each one representing a life that had once been part of Millhaven. Hours passed slowly, paper after paper, name after name, until finally Harper stopped. His finger rested on a faded entry. Evelyn Carter. Henry leaned closer. The sheriff read aloud. Moved into Millhaven approximately 21 years ago. Temporary residence. No permanent employment record. Left town. Unknown date. Henry frowned. Unknown. Harper nodded. That's unusual. The record continued. Last known address, near Lake Wren shoreline. Silence filled the room. The connection was becoming clearer. Evelyn had lived near the lake, the same lake where Daniel Reed had disappeared. Sheriff Harper closed the file slowly. So she didn't disappear with him, Henry said quietly. No, Harper replied, but she disappeared from the records around the same time. The implication hung in the air, not spoken fully, but understood. Later that day, they visited the town library, an older building made of stone and wood, warm even in winter. Mrs. Leland, the librarian, greeted them with a quiet smile. "I thought you might come here," she said gently. Harper looked surprised. "You expected us?" She nodded. Evelyn Carter used to spend a lot of time here. Henry stepped forward. "What kind of person was she?" The librarian thought for a moment. Quiet. Very thoughtful. She liked books about lakes, old maps, local history. Harper exchanged a look with Henry. She was studying the lake? Mrs. Leland nodded. More than studying. She felt connected to it. She hesitated before adding, "She once told me, Lake Wren doesn't just hold water. It holds memory." The same idea again. The lake remembers. Henry felt a slight chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. The librarian walked toward a back shelf and returned with an old storage box. Inside were a few donated items. Old notebooks, photographs, letters. She carefully placed one small journal on the table. "This was left behind years ago," she said. "No name written on the cover." Harper slowly opened it. The handwriting inside was different from Daniel's. Neat, soft, careful. The first page contained only one sentence. "If anyone is reading this, I'm sorry I could not explain everything in time." The room became very quiet. Henry looked at the sheriff. Harper looked at the journal again. And for the first time, the mystery did not feel like it was about discovering what happened. It felt like it was about understanding what someone tried to protect. Until the very end. The library felt unusually still that afternoon. Even the soft turning of pages nearby seemed distant, like sound itself had slowed down. Sheriff Harper kept the small journal open on the wooden table. Henry stood beside him, reading quietly over his shoulder. The handwriting inside was delicate but steady, as if written by someone trying to remain calm while carrying something heavy. Harper turned the page slowly. A date appeared at the top. December 17th. One day before Daniel Reed's last known visit. Henry leaned closer. This is just before he disappeared. Harper nodded. Yes. The entry continued. Daniel believes he has found something important beneath the lake. He doesn't fully understand it yet, but he feels it calling him. The sheriff paused. Henry frowned slightly. Calling him? Harper continued reading. I told him to wait, to think carefully, but he says the lake doesn't wait for anyone. The room felt colder, even inside the warm library. Mrs. Leland stood quietly nearby, watching without interrupting. Harper turned another page. The next entry was shorter, written in a slightly rushed hand. He is going to the dock tomorrow. I cannot stop him any more. Henry looked at the sheriff, so she knew he was going. Yes, Harper said quietly, and she tried to stop him. The journal continued. If something happens to him, it will not be an accident. There is something beneath the ice that is not natural, something old, something that does not belong to the surface world. Henry exhaled slowly. That sounds like fear. Harper shook his head slightly. Not fear. Warning. He closed the journal for a moment, thinking, then opened it again. At the very last page, there was a single line written more firmly than the rest. I will follow him to the lake. If he goes, I go too. Not to stop him, but to make sure he is not alone. Silence filled the library. Even the distant sounds of pages and footsteps seemed to fade. Henry spoke quietly. So Evelyn went with him. Harper nodded slowly. It looks that way. Mrs. Leland finally stepped closer. I always wondered what happened to her, she said softly. She stopped coming to the library after that winter. No one said anything for a moment, because now the story was no longer missing pieces. It was revealing them slowly, carefully, like something buried beneath ice finally deciding to surface. Harper placed the journal back on the table. Evelyn didn't disappear, he said. She chose to stay with him. Henry looked confused. But they both ended up under the lake? The sheriff didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out through the library window toward the distant white horizon. Lake Wren was somewhere beyond the trees. Quiet, still, holding secrets that had waited far too long. Finally, Harper spoke. Or maybe, he said slowly, they were trying to protect something together. The words stayed in the air for a long moment. And for the first time, the mystery no longer felt like a tragedy waiting to be solved. It felt like a decision, one made long ago, beneath the frozen silence of Lake Wren. The evening sky over Millhaven had begun to soften into shades of deep orange and fading blue. The town felt quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not empty, not unaware, just thoughtful. As if everyone, even without knowing all the details, could sense that something long buried was slowly coming to the surface. Sheriff Harper sat alone in his office for a while after returning from the library. The journal lay open on his desk. Henry stood near the window, watching the snow begin to fall again in small, slow flakes. Neither of them spoke. The words from Evelyn's journal continued to echo in their minds. Something beneath the ice that is not natural. Harper finally broke the silence. I don't think we're dealing with just a missing person case anymore. Henry turned slightly. What do you mean? The sheriff leaned back in his chair. Everything we've found, the wooden structure under the lake, the marked location, the box, the journal. He paused. It all points to intention. Henry frowned. You think Daniel and Evelyn went there on purpose? Yes. Harper tapped the desk lightly. Not by accident, not by panic. By plan. A long silence followed. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the windows like a distant reminder of the frozen lake waiting beyond the town. Harper opened the journal again. This time he turned to a page he had not focused on before. A small sketch was drawn in the corner. It showed the lake, but not the surface. The bottom. Lines were drawn beneath the ice, connecting shapes that looked like the wooden beams they had seen earlier. Henry leaned closer. What is that? Harper studied it carefully. It looks like an underground structure. Henry blinked. Under the lake? The sheriff nodded slowly. Not natural wood placement. Not fishing platforms. Something built deeper. Henry straightened. So Daniel didn't just find something. He was documenting it. Harper pointed at the sketch, and Evelyn was helping him understand it. The realization settled heavily between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Henry asked quietly, if they knew something was under there, why didn't they tell anyone? Harper looked at him. That's the real question. He closed the journal gently. Because whatever they believed was beneath that ice, they didn't think the world would understand it. The fire in the small office flickered softly, casting moving shadows across the walls. Outside, the snow grew steadier, thicker, almost like the town itself was being covered again, layer by layer. Harper stood up. We go back to the lake tomorrow. Henry nodded. But this time, Harper finished the sentence. We're not just looking for what happened. We're looking for why they chose the ice. A quiet tension filled the room. Not fear, but anticipation, as if the story was approaching its deepest point. Not the discovery of a body, but the discovery of a reason. Somewhere far beyond the office walls, Lake Wren rested beneath the growing snow. Still, silent, patient, waiting for the moment when its final secret would finally be understood. Morning came slowly over Millhaven, wrapped in a pale gray light. The snow had stopped again during the night, leaving the town even quieter than before. Everything looked fresh, untouched, and almost waiting. Sheriff Harper and Henry drove toward Lake Wren one last time. Neither of them spoke much during the ride. The weight of everything they had discovered now sat quietly between them. Evelyn, Daniel, the journal, the structure beneath the ice, and the feeling that none of this had ever been random. When they reached the lake, the team was already waiting, but today felt different. No urgency, no confusion, only focus. Harper looked across the frozen surface. We start where we left off, he said calmly. The drilling began again, slow, careful, patient. The ice responded with the same deep, echoing sound, but this time it felt less like resistance and more like acceptance, as if the lake itself had already decided to reveal what it had hidden for so long. Henry stood a little behind the team, watching the center point again. The exact place from Daniel's map. The exact place marked with the metal stake. The exact place where everything had always pointed. After a long time, the drill finally broke through. A deeper opening was made, and this time, something unexpected appeared almost immediately on the monitor. Not debris, not ice, but a structure, large, circular, made of old wooden supports arranged in a precise pattern beneath the lake floor. Sheriff Harper leaned forward. "This is it," he said quietly. The camera moved slowly beneath the ice. Everyone watched the screen in silence. The structure below was far more complex than they had imagined. It was not random. It was organized. Perfectly arranged wooden beams formed a circular pattern, almost like a design rather than construction. Henry whispered, "This wasn't built for fishing." Harper nodded. "No, this was built for something else." As the camera moved closer, something else appeared in the center. A flat stone platform, and carved into it, faint but visible, were symbols, not modern markings, not natural erosion, intentional carvings. Harper frowned. "These symbols, I've never seen anything like this in town records." One of the experts spoke quietly. "It looks old, very old. Possibly decades, maybe even more." Henry stared at it. Then Daniel didn't discover it first. Harper finished the thought. He only found what was already here. The realization changed everything. Daniel Reed had not created this mystery. He had stepped into something that already existed long before him, and Evelyn had followed him into it. That evening, Harper returned to the journal once again. Now every page felt heavier with meaning. He read the final connected entries carefully. Evelyn had not only warned Daniel, she had studied the lake for years, the structure beneath it, the patterns, the strange behavior of the ice in certain seasons. Henry stood beside him quietly. "So what does it all mean?" he asked. Harper exhaled slowly. "It means they believed the lake was not just natural." He paused. It was hiding something built long before them. Henry looked confused. "But what about the body?" Harper looked at him. "That part is still simple." Daniel went down to confirm it. And something went wrong. A long silence followed. Then Harper added softly, "But not in the way we first thought. Because there's no sign of violence. No struggle. No accident." Henry frowned. "Then how?" Harper interrupted gently. "I think they chose to stay beneath the ice." The room went still. Not fear. Not shock. Just quiet understanding forming slowly. Night returned to Millhaven one final time in this story. Snow drifted gently outside the window. Inside the sheriff's office, everything was calm. Harper placed all the findings together, the journal, the box, the map, the photograph, the structural evidence. Henry sat quietly, looking at it all. "So what was it?" he asked. Harper looked out the window toward the distant frozen lake. "I don't think it was danger," he said. "I think it was belief." Henry stayed silent. Harper continued softly. "Daniel and Evelyn believed the lake was protecting something. And when they went beneath it, They didn't disappear. They became part of it. A long, peaceful silence filled the room. Not sadness, not fear, just acceptance. Outside, Lake Wren stretched endlessly under the night sky. Still, calm, timeless, as if it had always known everything and had only been waiting for the right moment to let the story be remembered again. And so, the mystery of Lake Wren did not end with a crime, but with a memory preserved beneath ice, waiting, not to be feared, but to be understood.